Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. If you don't know me, I'm a ton of Circus. I'm a longtime player, caster, and streamer of a game called LittleWarGame, which is a browser RTS that a lot of the people who are in the RTS and StarCraft community played for a couple of weeks. About a month or two ago, while we were waiting for something much like this to come live, and here we are. It's Dreamhack Atlanta. I was not sadly able to go, but I'm able to go in spirit. We're going to be watching TLO versus Mana. Keep in mind that I have already seen this. So I know exactly what is going to, well, not exactly as in play-by-play eidetic memory, but I do know what's going to happen. I know who's going to win. I know, sorry for all of you out there, that TLO is going to lose this 0-2, and Mana's going to go on to win the entire tournament. But that's not the interesting thing. What's interesting to me is Stormgate, right? And let's talk about a little bit about why. So when I first started casting LittleWarGame a long time ago, I just saw it and thought, oh, this is interesting. And I started doing replays and analysis and playing the game a lot. And I thought it would be fun to try and take the skills that I have learned or the analysis that I've done for LittleWarGame and see how we can make them apply over here for a new game in form of Stormgate. And so we're going to see how much of that applies and doesn't apply, and we're going to use that to recontextualize some of the things about RTS, see what we can pull from LittleWarGame, see what we can't pull from LittleWarGame, but actually we then have to assume is different inside of Stormgate itself. And I also want to put in some prefaces. So I myself have done a lot of alpha and beta tests of a lot of games, RTS is included over the years, and currently I am working officially in gaming, so the full context here, although not in an RTS background or in an RTS title, so you should know that I know this, and I want to make sure you understand. This stuff can change. The balance of vehicle, the balance can change. What units are can change. The mechanics can change. What they're named is can be changed. All of these things change. This is just the process of a game being in alpha and then beta and then releasing. So I'm not going to talk about some very hot button items in the community as of late. I'm not going to talk about the art style. I'm not going to talk about what people perceive as visibility or replay, issues or graphical items. We're not going to talk about any of that. We're not going to be talking about whether this unit needs to get nerfed. And you need to also know, I personally am not inside of the alpha or beta, so I don't have the ability to see these things, but that's part of the fun, right? Whereas I suspect many other people have actually been part of the gameplay experience of Stormgate, and so their information is a little colored by things that they already know. They're kind of in the mill, as it were. They know what's happening on a day-by-day basis, week by week, season by season, as they're getting into the beta, as they're getting into these things. I do not, which thankfully means I can speculate a lot of things. I could be wrong about a lot of things, but you'll also understand that any analysis that I make comes from the place of externally looking in, so you'll know that it's coming from a separate game entirely. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and make sure the volume is muted, because this is in fact not my stream. I don't have the ability to do this myself, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and unpause it. So I want you to stress, understand, and believe as well. This is not a cast, okay? We're not doing a cast. This is purely analysis. Because one, you can listen. I've muted it, so you can listen to Tastosis. I don't have co-streaming rights. Definitely, I don't know if I'm even allowed to do what I'm doing now, but I'm definitely not allowed to just have like the full volume and say like, yeah, like reaction video guy stuff the entire time. So we're not going to do that. We're going to mute that. If you want to watch the stream, go ahead and watch it. This is not the first time you should be watching it. I don't think it's the best first viewing experience. We're trying to learn more about the game. So in the bottom left-hand side, we have TLO. In the upper right-hand side, we have Mana, and this is a Vanguard versus Infernals match. And something I want to stress here about the gameplay is that I'm not in it, so we're going to be applying this a lot of look into the lens of how this would look inside of another LittleWarGame, another RTS I play a lot of, rather. Let's flip the words, LittleWarGame. So the way I have seen it, and I've watched the games already, so the way I'm perceiving this is that Vanguard actually has the fastest units. And I judge the speed of a race in LittleWarGame context by how fast their fastest units are, right? Or what their faction or their role, whatever word you're more comfortable with, right? Their race is the thing that we have typically said. And so I want to look at it, and I want to provide analysis from this feedback point, right? Which is, first off, in the bottom left for Vanguard, I want you to think that this is the fast faction. Now, there's a number of reasons to do that. They don't have the defensive white bar health. I'm going to call that Veil from now on. It just makes sense that if a Shroud Stone generates Shroud, then the thing that obscures you inside of the Shroud makes you harder to see is called a Veil. So if you ever hear me say Veil, I'm talking purely about the white bar health. Like right here, we can see that right there, that white bar. I'm going to be calling that Veil throughout the entire thing. So Vanguard looks to be the fast faction. Okay, so they have multiple. They have the Scout, Little Doggo. Obviously, is pretty fast. Not as fast as when a Brute splits up into Fiends and then takes it out. And then they have the Hedgehogs, which are themselves very fast. They appear to be, if not faster than Fiends, then kind of like a Wolf versus Raider scenario where they're barely slower, but understand that they are barely slower, and also the potential for firepower and the fact that they can get repaired is very helpful. So the first thing I'm noticing in this game as the Scout goes out is that I think the Scout could have been blocking here. I don't actually know if they have worker block inside of Stormgate. What I mean by that is I don't know if you could take the Scout, put it right here, and then obscure this Fiend from getting another base set up. And as it goes ahead and sets up another shrine, we see that the Scout gets here. The Scout's damage is negligible. So you're going to know that this Scout's going to know that the Infernal player's on 2 base. I strongly suspect, having watched these games, 2 things to think about, right? The first thing to think about is it's possible that although there is something on the line here, these 3 players were told, hey, try and make it last a set amount of time, right? We're not telling you who has to win or who has to lose. But if you remember the StarCraft 2 beta and the events that went live there, and if you didn't, I'll just tell you, there are a lot of things where it wasn't obvious that players were doing what would be the fastest, most effective thing to end the game. It was more that they were showing off a mix of units. Now, this is not being casted by traditional casters, and there's a bit of a show match aspect going on there, but this itself being a show match, and coming off the heels of the streams less than a week ago, I suspect it's possible, right, that the players were told try and make this last, don't have any crazy 1 base pushes. Another thing, though, is that if you look at the charge ability that the Vanguard have, and we're going to see this over the course of the game, TLO is going to use it multiple times, it seems to take their Bobs, their worker units, and just transform them into actual rolling Chads. Like, I think it's a Magadon. They just took out this thing that looks like a combination of a Kodo Beast and a werewolf, from Warcraft 3 and LittleWarGame, respectively. And the workers just surround it and just destroy it. So, pretty sure the Infernal faction has to expand faster, or has to expand in step because of the defensive abilities that you can provide on those Bobs. Right? So those 2 factors combined mean we're going to get to at least a 2 base game. We're probably going to get to 3. And if you're worried that we're not going very fast, trust me, this is the going pace that we're going to be going at, because we have to get a lot of stuff out of the way. We have to get a lot of preamble out, and then we can move on from there. So I'm worried that the charge ability, or it seems like the charge ability of the Bobs that the Vanguard have, is so powerful that it makes it very hard to actually rush people. I remember there was some talk of streamers about how powerful rushes used to be. I strongly suspect that this is part of why that this and the format, right, being kind of a show match at Dreamhack, and less so an actual tournament for like $10,000, is encouraging these players to play in this way. That's probably why the reward is a trophy, and not anything that might tempt them to do something otherwise. But I think that all means, actually, that the Infernals did have to expand faster here, and I want to put this idea again in your head. So it's very hard to kill because of the overcharge. It's very hard to kill on the Bobs. It's very hard to kill Vanguard, or it seems like they have a very strong defensive tool. And then Infernals also have the defensive tool, which is their Veil, their white health, their temporary armor / health. But I want you to note also that there's this curious thing that happens with Infernals, where when they build their units, their barracks equivalent. It's not the Iron Legion, it's not the Conclave, that's for Gaunts, right? I think it's the Iron Legion. Anyways, they get stacks of units that they can then instantly generate. So that's their defender's advantage. And then the fact that they have bonus armor and they can instantly spawn, I think are going to encourage both players to not cause the game to end. These both mean, by the way, they could probably proxy to a ridiculously strong extent. Like imagine if there's an Iron Legion just popped right over here, but except on TLO's side of the base or a side of the map. But again, all these things mean faster units seem to be for Vanguard. Slower units that get value over time and seem to have more melee focus is on Mana's side with the Infernals. We have a matchup very similar to this, though not exact, inside of Little Wargame. And the way that that matchup works in Little Wargame is Beast versus Rax. The faster units use wolves and snakes to try and harass the other player, and then they can transition into very powerful late game tech units like dragons and werewolves. And the Rax player, the player who has the slower units over on the side, this by the way, I'm very curious here. Well, let me finish the thought. The Rax player, or the player who has the slower, sturdier units that want to take a straight up fight, they're slower. They can't force the fight. So what they do is they tend to close off choke points, harass very strongly, and have very strong, I don't want to say timing pushes because it's hard to mention what the timings are because the crossover isn't great here, but they have strong pushes that force units, and oftentimes you'll see a Rax player push out, force units from the beast player, and then retreat, and actually forcing the units is the damage. So what I'm seeing here is that there is a brute, and the brute obviously is never going to be fast enough to deny the scout. And I imagine there is a lot of information games to be. I don't know. So it's weird here, right? So the scout being slower as the shrine goes up, meaning the second base. Since the scout is slower than these two fiends, not imps, but I think they're called fiends. I'm pretty sure. So they're going to have decaying health over time. This basically is an admission that StarCraft 2 Zerglings are goated, by the way. But the scout that we're seeing that went down, I don't think it was doing a lot of damage. We're going to see in the next game that TLO can try and bother a brute with the scout when it's creeping. And so maybe that's what the scout is for. I also wonder if since the fiends are stronger are faster than the scouts, to what extent are they stronger? Fiends seem to have, I think, 60 health and 30 veil. Veil again being white health, white bar health. So they have 60 health and 30 veil, and the scout has 120 health. So the scout must actually have some modifier on it that makes it really bad against these units. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me, unless it was a misplay. Like to not just turn around and try and fight. I don't think the scout can run away to any extent here. Yep, and Iron Vault. There we go. It's not called the Iron Legion. I'm thinking of Fallout. So what's interesting here is that it seems like TLO doesn't want to use the overcharge. And there is an implication here, because we're going to see his main later, that man-yarding or splitting up, like moving a bunch of workers from the main to the natural is not actually that good in this game. Because we would expect TLO has been part of a bunch of things, right? He was part of the Alpha StarCraft project. He's done show matches before. Leans me to suspect. Also, the familiarity with which he's pressing buttons here leads me to suspect that he was a player he's a player in the alpha beta stages of Stormgate, right? Probably had good feedback, or at the very least good visibility of the gameplay of the project. So when he doesn't use his overcharge here, it makes me wonder if overcharge is he knows it's gonna be used later, but also he's not splitting the workers from his main to his natural. And in Little Wargame and in Brood War and not as much StarCraft 2, but it still happens in StarCraft 2. Splitting workers in Little Wargame is much better than having them. It's something crazy. Like if you have 10 workers in Little Wargame and you're on one gold mine. I mean, here's the Ethereum. This is the Luminite. I'm gonna remember it, right? But the point is that in Little Wargame, if you have 10 workers on one gold mine, it's actually better to have 4 on 2 gold mines than 10 on 1, right? It's actually then even, it's better to have 5 on 2 than 10 on 1 by 30 to, I don't know the exact percent actually. I think it's like 40% better to split than to have them all on 1 because they have stacking inefficiencies. I saw something on Reddit that alluded to the fact that there's inefficiencies in the worker count, but I don't think that they have been mathed out to that extent. Otherwise, he's splitting units to get Therium inside of his main, and he seems reluctant to use the overcharge here. So the Fiends, this is part of why I think I would have liked the Scout to turn around and hit it again, unless the Scout can't turn around and hit to do damage, or he just wasn't paying attention at that exact moment, right? So these Fiends do in fact lose their health over time, and we do see the Iron Vault coming up over here, and it looks like these are pretty tanky. Like, they're not as tanky as workers, so I'm thinking about this from a Little Wargame context. So in a Little Wargame context, if we think of the Fiends as 2 wolves, right? Should 2 wolves be able to beat 3 workers? We would say that no, that they can't, right? But wolves are faster than workers, so we're seeing a little bit more lethality than I would expect from Little Wargames. So I'm gonna assume that the 2 fiends here represent about 4 wolves worth of damage, and that's like the mental model I'll use, right? So it makes sense. Okay, they're trying to repair each other. They go down. That's unfortunate. And then there's the overcharge because he doesn't want to lose his second one. It seems like it only uses a quarter bar. And he's charged up 2 of it since he managed to make the expansion. So that's very curious. So let's talk about those matchups again as this little bit of harassment is going to be done. So if you have the faster faction or the race, which if we've seen the hedgehogs, we've seen how quickly. So scouts are slower than fiends, but hedgehogs are about the same speed, and scouts are much faster than the other units that we see the infernals use throughout this. Like, they're faster than Spriggans. They look like they're faster than Fiends. They're definitely faster than the Magadons or Magmadons. They're definitely much faster than a Weaver. Slower than a Dreadnought, I think it's called. But those are like pickup, flying, transport, like support units. So what I'm getting out here is the Scout is faster than everything except Fiends. And then the Hedgehog seems to just be faster than everything else. So if you're the faster faction, which I judge by your fastest units, you want to have more expansions than your opponent, right? So let's look at the map. Okay, you can see the map over here, right? You can see my mouse. So over on the upper right hand side, right? Uh, we're gonna see that this is Mana, and he's got the slower, more defensive army. So this is something that people have mapped out pretty well on Ravaged. It's a pretty common trend in StarCraft and in other real-time strategy games. If you're the slower faction, right, we'll win the fight, but we can't force you to come to us for the fight. You tend to take expansions where you can push out off of one path, right? You can push through. So I wanted you to draw a line with me. So here's the main, here's the natural, and here is the third that actually Mana is going to end up taking, and it makes perfect sense. And why? Because if we do this, this seems like it would be a lot of time to get over here and cut through, right? That seems like it would be a bit of a hassle. Okay. On the bottom here, can you not see my cursor? What the? Okay, cool. So it seems like it would be a lot of time to push through and get up here. Even if you have units that could break the trees, it would take a long time to get here. And also, if this fight goes badly, you have no choice but to go but back. And that means that they could just push across the map here. So it looks like it's going to be very hard to harass the natural from here. What about this third base location? Well, this would be very harassable by TLO against Mana. So, but what Mana's going to do is he's going to take this third base. It makes a lot of sense here because then you can pull units in this choke point right here, and let's look at the ground distance that you have to cover, right? So if you're Mana and you have to defend after you grab this third, you only have to put units here, maybe a Shroud Stone, right? A tower, as we would call it in Little Wargame, to defend, and then you only have to back from here to here. Now you might say, what if the army goes over here and attacks the the Therium? Well, the Therium, you could just pull the 5 or so workers associated with the Therium back to your main, and you can do that and just do this with your army. These are the only 2 points. This is actually the only small straightaway right here of interaction that Mana has to contend with. Now, if you're TLO, and again, I think Scouts and Hedgehogs alone will, I hope I'm not butchering that unit because we will certainly never hear the end of it if I am. If you are the faster faction, the faster race, you don't want one place where you can defend everything. You actually want to have very sprawling open paths where everyone can come to you. So this would never be a base of consideration for TLO, right? Because then TLO has to defend this same ramp over here with faster units. Faster units, RTS convention means that they're not as strong, right? So taking a fight in one place, not a good idea. So we are going to see TLO take the base over here on the bottom. Now, I want to note something, and this. Okay, listen, I can't get away from the fact that I've seen this, and you'll say that it's survivorship bias, or it's confirmation bias, or, oh, you know who wins, so of course you would say that. The center of this map is actually fantastic for mana. Really, really good as the slower faction, seemingly, of the Infernals. And why? Well, let's think about it. Mana only has to hold this area here to essential. If he holds this area here, he guards the natural, because if you go all the way around, he can just doom push right here to here, slower like here to here. Distances involved are better. Even though his units will be slower, he'll get there before the TLO can pull the units back into a defensive position, right? And then Mana wants to, once Mana is defending this area, you could take this as your fourth, but then look how ugly this is. You have to defend this, and you have to defend this. Like, now you have 2 points to defend, and that's a bit wonky. So something you should know about Stormgate, if you're not familiar with it, is that the green here, these are grassy trees, they can be knocked down. So what's better, holding this and holding this, or pushing through and taking the center? And if Mana cuts in right here, or he cuts in here, but if he had cut in here through the vision side, this probably would have been even better. Then he only has to hold army in here, make sure the trees don't break. Just put static defense in here. And now look, these are the only two areas. If he cuts through here, through the upper right-hand side, through the 1 to 2, like 1:30 position, right, or the 2 p.m. position, he only has to defend this. And this is defended by blocks and stuff. Now, let's think about TLO's game plan. This is going to get really ugly for TLO. Because 1, 2, 3 makes sense, right? Pretty easy. Grab the third base over here. But now TLO actually does want to grab this fourth base. And so, if you're just looking at the map, just knowing what the factions are, by looking at their speed, we can say that if the game goes past 4 bases for both players, then it's fine. So let's look. So if TLO owns this and this as the faster faction, then TLO can send units cut through the grass here, but can also just go around, and there's attack paths up here, and then attack paths around here, right? And then you can try and get this like circle around here with TLO. That's what TLO will be aiming for. That's what the map suggests you should be doing between these two players anyways.
I got work in the morning.
Okay. Have a good one.
Have fun.
Yup, I'll do my best. Night. Okay. And a barracks is getting made so they can make the Lancer. I'm going to be honest, I'm not very impressed with Lancers, but Lancers might end up being like soldiers in LittleWarGame. Okay, that poor fiend is going to die. Lancers might end up being more like soldiers in LittleWarGame. You make them because they have one job and they do it pretty well. I do want to note that the Lancer has 160 health, and I think the Brute had 160 plus 90. So let's go ahead. We're going to get a click here pretty soon, I'm sure. Right, on the Brutes, and here we go. Yeah, so Lancers are either were they 260? Anyways, Brutes are 190 and 95, so it looks like Veil is universally just half of the unit's ability. I would say here that if you're the Infernals, if you're like the more hands player, you probably already want to play the Infernals, because one, the Fiends are faster than anything pre-Hedgehogs, right? They're faster than Scouts, they're faster than Lancers. And then the Brute also it's got a lot of effective hit points, and you also have micro control to split it. And then so you have you can use good decision making to split it, and then you also have a fast unit. And movement is the most powerful thing you can have inside of any real time strategy game. Like, it's amazing what people can do with strong movement. These Brutes seem to be dealing about 30 damage. I mentioned this based on some values that we see in the second game. And the Therium Mine gets up. Again, the resource aspect I'm going to be skipping over a little bit. It's not that it's unimportant, right? if units are dying resource-wise, then I care a ton. But I'm actually not, like I said, in the alpha, in the beta. I can't tell you how much these units cost. And I don't believe that they covered it. I could have gone and watched a stream, but also there's a chance that there was a balance change from those 2 points. So I actually don't really like deal with this well, the vision camp, because here's the thing: is that I'm pretty sure that TLO's units, up until he has hedgehogs or a lot of scouts, is just slower. Maybe that's why he's doing it. So results-based analysis, the first time I watched this, I thought to myself, why is Mana killing this vision camp? Surely Mana could go kill the vision camp on the other side because he has more powerful units. But you have to remember when you're watching an RTS, especially a new one, that one, you might not know all of the interactions at play, and then two, you have to think about the counters, right, or the counter positives, or the counterfactuals, or like if they're doing this, and we assume that there's an intelligent reason for doing that. What are the reasons that they could do that? And then when we think about that, we realize what some of the reasonings might be. So we saw, for instance, that the scouts are slower than the fiends, right? And we did see that. Okay, and now what's noteworthy here is also the fiends did see the barracks go up, so they know that there is a lancer, but there might be a bunch of scouts or some unit like that that could surround them, right? He doesn't have an idea as to how aggressive his opponent wants to be quite yet, and typically in these games, the race or the faction that has the faster units gets to make the decision first. This is more so seemingly for the Vanguard because TLO has bomb protection, right? He has like 4 button presses of protect the bombs. So maybe getting the vision camp here is because there was a threat of being surrounded or harassed down here. Maybe this is just like the neutral play. I think it still looks like he could have gone for the one over here, especially since we know that Mana does end up attacking on the other side. But it makes sense to have the vision here because this is the one strip area that you want to protect. But again, as we're thinking about it, I still think he could have gone down over to the side because here's the thing: sometimes, sometimes in Little War Game, you'll see a Rax player do a move out, and you'll wonder why did they turn around or why didn't they go as hard as they could. And what you don't know is that wolves or other fast melee units could have come and surrounded them, and then that just would have been the end of the game. Done, finished, gone, right? But as we're looking at this, why is the Black Lotus in front? Put the Ancestral Recall in front. Jeez. But as we're still looking at this, knowing that he's going to move across the map later, I think that he could have used negative information to figure it out. Again, this is all with the caveat that it's entirely possible that your boy over here, TLO, and Mana, that they're playing, I wouldn't say on a script, but they're playing to be like, hey, let's make sure this game gets to a long state so that players can see some of the units and interactions, right? I don't think it's an accident that this is an hour and 53 minutes, for instance. So, 4 minutes of vision seems very good. Then again, the alternative is just holding the equivalent of a Zelnaga Watchtower. There's not really an equivalent of creeping inside of Little Wargame. There were some mods that tried to do it, and we did try for a long time to have heroes. I just want to speak on this very quickly. Heroes are very hard to make work in real-time strategy games. There we go. That's the very quick thought. Yep, so the Lancer's going to hit here. Oh, there we go. So the Lancer has... There we go. Okay, so the Lancer has 240. I got the numbers wrong. I thought it was 160. So the Lancer has 240, and the Bruiser, or the Brute, rather, I should say. Oh, that's why I did that. So the Bruiser has 190 and 95 Veil. The problem that I'm seeing here is, listen, I'm not playing the game, but I don't really know who wins between Lancer and Brute, in the context that with Control, you can split up the Brute, right? And that the Brute could just have a ton of Veil. It could have half again, like an extra 50% of its health in Veil. Knowing that, I suspect the Lancer has to win, right? Otherwise, this is just kind of crazy. Because also, if the fast unit can beat the slow strong unit, then why are you using slow strong units? We also see TLO make a lot of these. So while he's going up, he might just make a couple of Lancers. I think he just made the Lancer here to get the Therium. It would not surprise me if Therium was needed for um, the Hedgehogs. Well, probably not. Well, yeah, he's got Therium in his main. So I'll just that's just speculation. What's interesting here is that I think at this point in the game, again, because you could have scouts that are pretty fast, right, to help with the defense, and he's just going right to hedgehogs right now. This is kind of like in Little Wargame when a beast player just says, I'm going to make one den and then go grab this base, and then I'm going to tech right into something like werewolves, right? And typically when that happens in Beast versus Rax, there's like a number of wolves. The magic number is like 5 usually, but sometimes more, right? And I think that's what's happening here. It's more of a safe. This looks more like a safety lancer. Also, that charge. There must be a secondary resource or secondary thing that you can do with the command post, because this command post has not gone up in. It's only so it had 2 bars of charge. It had 2 bars of charge at the point that you could, at the first point that we saw, where it then seemed like TLO was reluctantly using 1, and now it's up to 2 bars of charge. This makes me think that it must have like some kind of mule like thing, some kind of economy boosting thing, or something kind of like chrono boost, something of this nature. One of the things that's interesting to note, and this is a somewhat recent in the scale of the game development in Little Wargame, was that we found that Beast players would spread their buildings more than Rax players, because Rax players want tight chokes where they can fight everything in, and the Beast player has this like encompassing vision of, as long as there's enough space for my units to get out and I can surround you, I'll do that. So they're not looking to take a straight up brawl fight. So I'm worried a bit for TLO here that he's put this up here. I suspect the reason that he put this bay up here. We'll get a click on it pretty soon, as it's going to start to take some damage. Yep, there's a kill on a brute. Okay, interesting to note that the fiends seem to have a leap animation, and that the leap means that they're either flying as they spawn, or they're invincible as they spawn, or they are no collision as they spawn, right? So they're either invincible flying, or they don't collide with any other units, because that's the only other reason it makes sense that sacrificing the brute there to get the fiends out is worth it. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it, because the fiends just wouldn't escape. So this is probably ripe for some terrain abuse, I'm not gonna lie. Right? Like, I would love to be in the game and figure this out, but oof, my QA testing brain is thinking about whether or not you can skip over trees or skip over cliffs by sacrificing the brute in a close enough position. Yep, one of them didn't get out, and they're going to be clicking the building here to tell us what it is. So there's the hedgehog, and this is the med bay. I bet no, it's not a med bay. What's the name of this structure? Come on, click the structure. So this is interesting because this happens a lot in. Well, the first time I saw this, I actually thought that things were going really badly for mana, and then I saw that mana took exactly the third base that he needed to take. So I want to talk about this a bit. In Rax versus, and Tasteosis talks about this as well. In a few seconds after this fight, right? So this part where the hedgehog, it is the hedgehog. Oh, thank goodness! Where the hedgehog comes out and it's faster. We have this in Little Wargame, where sometimes you will be fighting as the Rax, well, I'll just say the slower faction, right? For whatever reason, the slower faction. And then you realize you're not going to win the fight. And as soon as you turn around, everything goes to shit immediately, because you can get run down, right? If you're in Little Wargame and you have soldiers, you realize you can't take the fight, you leave, the wolves will just nip at you until you die. The Gatling guns will nip at you until you die. The archers will nip at you until you die, right? Retreating has a fundamental cost in real-time strategy games. What's interesting about the brutes is that they don't have quite the same restriction, right? Normally I would say don't even move across the map with the brutes. Like, if they die, it's all going to shit. You're probably like really hard pressed to do any damage with this attack in the first place. It doesn't seem like a good look. But because the brutes can split into fiends, I'm actually okay with that, especially since fiends are like something like like half again. So we had a meta in Little Wargame where wolves were very strong, and fiends seem more like they're strong wolves than they seem like weak zerglings. Like they move like weak zerglings, but they seem to play like they're strong wolves. And if you've played both games, you'll understand what I mean by that. Yeah, so there's the split, and also this is an implication that this army right here can't actually take said fight. I'm surprised there's not a repair going on in that building. Maybe it's an automatic thing. And as it's going on and taking some damage, again, the reason that this is all bad actually is it's not just that the brutes don't die and they can be transformed into fiends and then they can escape at any time that they want to. Like if this gets really bad, the brutes just leave and say we've got better things to do. But the real problem is that Mana's got the third base, exactly the third base we were talking about before. And I want you to note that this third base that Mana is going to come back to, this is how you know that what I'm saying isn't a pile of shit, essentially. We're going to see Mana dump defenses right here and right here. And why here? Well, why here? Because this is the easiest way. First off, holding this somewhat holds this health creep camp, right? Which is good because that means you can take a big fight. Like if Mana at any point uses his slow strong army and kills this camp, and then gets pulled back into a fight, he has, it looks like 4 minutes of bonus health regeneration. He's doing, so he has soft control of this objective, and then he'll physically hold this and it's a choke, right? And then he'll also have this. Now notice the defensive angle here. Mana can just take his units. He actually, I think, would want to leave down and to the right just to make sure there's not any sneakiness happening with the third. Although I will say this is something you find in Little Wargame as well. RTS players will know at a certain level of gameplay skill, you can't fake spending resources, right? And what I mean by that is it can't be possible for TLO to have all of this and show the defense that he is showing, and then also have a third base going on here. Whereas your boy Mana can be grabbing the third base over here. So this is something that we saw a lot more in Little Wargame. Around the time, so there's a time in Little Wargame, and I'm comparing this to Little Wargame because in Little Wargame there's Rax, the slow strong force, and then there was Beast, the race that typically had faster, more mobile units that couldn't win a straight up fight but had map control. You can put analogs in this or comparisons to StarCraft 2, to Tooth and Tail, to any other number of RTS games that you want. And usually, the way that the Rax player would get a third base but not actually just lose the game, and I'm comparing the Rax gameplay to the Infernals because they're slower, they have Veil, so it's almost like a pseudo shield. They seem like they benefit more from defensive play. Um, you would push out with 4 soldiers and 1 archer, and your goal was to either do as much damage as possible, or you had to know this before you did the push out, do as much damage as possible, or force the beast player to delay their tech as long as possible, and this would all buy time for you to go get your third base. Right, and that's pretty much what Mana is doing here, right? Is shoving forward these brutes and fiends as necessary to transform them so he doesn't lose the full value of the brute, right? And then grabbing the third base over here, and if anything really goes to piss, all the brutes transform into fiends, and they get horribly out of position, and everything's bad. All the brutes transform into fiends, they become the fastest thing on the field, and then Mana can run back here. And especially if there's a Shroud Stone, the defensive tower here, all is good. This going down is a big pickup. The mech bay. The mech bay. Okay, I thought it was like the biokinesis lab or something like that. So I talked about this before, and again, if you're new, I'm sorry, but we're gonna be doing this. We're gonna be going in depth because it helps me understand what the state of the game is like, and it also helps you understand that there are things that cover from other RTS games that apply here that are not called StarCraft. And I think StarCraft 2 is a useful comparison because the developers of Stormgate are inspired by it, or came from it, or the community from it, or just made it. But if you bring in the perspective of other real-time strategy games that aren't the ones that are typically mentioned, like StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3, then you can get a non-Blizzard, but Blizzard-inspired perspective of how these things work out. So again, I just want to stress, I don't really know what TLO is doing by having the mech bay out here. The mech bay is making a unit that is kind of a cross between the Hellion and the Gatling gun. from StarCraft 2 and Little Wargame respectively. I know Taste Hostess says that it's kind of like a super vulture, but it looks like it can't stand and deliver. And also, you have to respect the burst potential of the Infernals, because once they get on an objective, think about this. We're not there yet. This is kind of a show match, right? This is kind of a peek into what the factions can do. But think about this. The brutes do 30 damage. I did it because we calced the creep damage in the next game. The brutes can all hit, and then if they need to burst, they can all hit, transform into fiends, nibble, and then run away. So having a building, especially a big tech building like this on the outside, looks really bad for TLO. I will give him an out, which is that he's creating the Hedgehog, which is a very fast mobile unit, and also these buildings are tankier than perhaps most people would be accustomed to in StarCraft 2. So in StarCraft 2, maybe you wouldn't want to put buildings like this out here, especially the important tech structures. You wouldn't think of doing a wall with your factory, right, as Terran. That seems a bit ridiculous, right? You might do it with the add-on, but even then you've got units there to help defend. But you wouldn't just do like, front of my third, factory. But in Little Wargame, you would. In Little Wargame, it's very common because in that game, this is something that's come up over and over, and why I think Little Wargame is a useful game to bring into Stormgate comparisons is that in Little Wargame, the damage to hit point density ratio of units, basically how much damage do units do relative to the health of the things, especially buildings they're hitting, is very low, right? I'll give you an example. I'm pretty sure that a castle has 1,200. So a castle is a command center, basically. In StarCraft, that has like, it's 400 gold. Yeah, you can 6 Zerglings, like that's nothing to scoff at, right? But in Little Wargame, they have 1,200 hit points and I think 2 armor, and a wolf, which is like kind of a slow Zergling, a tankier, slower Zergling, right? Imagine if 2 Zerglings were 1 unit. That's what a wolf is, kind of slower, stronger, but still fast. They do 10 damage each, right, or 10 or 12 damage each. That means that they're doing like 8 damage to a thing that can be repaired faster than one of them can nibble on it. So TLO might be overemphasizing the survivability. And again, I want to give him an out. He's making a fast mobile harassment unit. If he puts the building to the front, then the mobile harassment unit gets out there. Like the distance we've seen from the unit movement, the distance from placing it in his main to his natural might be like 10, 12 seconds. Which, if you're gonna go harass someone, 12 seconds is a deal. It's a problem. But the mech bay is gonna go down. It has 1,200 hit points. The poor thing. And I will say, interesting that the Bob overcharge, by the way, does not actually does not affect the allied units seemingly. And this is kind of what I was talking about here. This is super unfortunate. This is just a micro thing. I'm sure, he knows, like, well, okay, I won't do that again, I guess. Fiends are really fast. These things are really fast. And I think that the Lancers, listen, they talk, and we see it in game 2, that the Lancers have an upgrade where they get faster every time that they take damage. I'm not impressed. like I understand making a couple of them for defense, but maybe it's just the player difference, because Tastosis does mention that Mana was a top 10 player on the ladder at the time that they have this game, whereas TLO had no such accolade to his name, right? And I'm gonna speculate that's not good. So the perspective I want to provide here now, as TLO starts the third base, is TLO, I think, with scouts and hedgehogs, has the faster army, but because he only made the one Lancer, right? And I don't know, again, how good scouts are. I know that they can do some damage because there was a threat of creep steal in game 2. But by not using any of them and going straight into these hedgehogs, it looks like the Infernals were able to do more damage. And also, this third is now unpunishable. So let's talk about why this is an unpunishable third. So again, Mana can just put units right here. That's it. That's the simple version. So now we have the perspective of a very, like a faster, on average, oriented, less defensive, therefore more offensive faction in TLO's Vanguard, right? In the human resistance. And they're slower, they're faster, but they're getting their third slower. And this third looks like completely unassailable for these hedgehogs, because you might think, well, why not just dive in? First off, I don't see any units moving on that screen. Do you see units moving on that screen? I don't. I see the therium and I see the illuminite and I see the structure, but I don't see any moving blocks. There's not units here, man. So the other problem that we have with this is that if those units go in, they're not leaving. There's just going to be some units parked on this choke. And now there is going to be a good bit of harassment going on. Remember what I was saying before about this is the angle that mana can take to defend all three bases? Maybe something here later. Well, that's why we're getting the meat farm and the Shroudstone right here. Shroudstone also being really useful because the Veil is plus. Have you seen this square root? Veil is plus 50% of the unit's hit points. I'm calling it Veil because, one, I work on a mod called Veil of Codex, and two, it makes sense that the faction that gets a white health bar when they're on Shroud can have that Shroud called a Veil, right? It just or Mist. You can call it Veil, you can call it Mist. I like Veil. Because Mist is also Missed, Mist. Yep, and so another Bob. This is a good trap here. This is the cost of 2 brutes just eaten up. I'm very surprised, by the way, that the Fiends were able to get through here. I speculate that would be amazing. That was a bit surprising at TLO as well. Right, but the Hedgehogs are going to eat these up, and what's important is to note that mana has some units. We can't click on the minimap, but look over where my mouse is pointing right now. Yeah, now that this is here, this would be a good spot for TLO to harass if it weren't for this stack of units at Shroudstone Meat Farm. That is right here. Also the, what are the small little dudes? Furbags? It's something like something like that, right? Basically, the meat farm gives supply, but it also spawns units that help in the defense, so this is looking really good. And now there's only one angle for these poor hedgehogs to go, which is up over this way to attempt to harass the Therium. But as long as there are units here, especially when we see that there is another meat farm and another Shroudstone placed over here, yeah, this is going to be very hard, because now we have a 3-base against a setting up 3-base TLO, against now a fully going into power mode 3-base mana. And remember what I said at the beginning, with these hedgehogs and also with the fact that he started with the scout, we saw this in LittleWarGame when we gave people a starting fast unit for scouting purposes. They used it to out micro and kill their opponent, right? So it does probably have to be a bit weaker, but TLO started with the fastest thing on the map, and the Hedgehogs are now the fastest thing on the map. And the problem is that he's got all the speed and all of the map control, but none of the rewards of the map control. Because TLO really, I think at this point, again, spoiler, I know what happens, but I think he wants to take the 4th base now, right? And I know that sounds really aggro, but just the economies of fast units versus strong units suggest that that should be happening. Now, again, you might say, well, you know, Vanguard, the human resistance, they have some strong units too. It doesn't matter if they have strong units or weak units or fast units. It's the comparison that matters. It doesn't matter that hedgehogs are slower than zerglings in StarCraft 2, so we might say that they look slow. In this game, they are the fastest thing on this battlefield right now. And if TLO's faction can make faster or the fastest things than Mana's Infernals, then he is the map control faction, right? Whether he is playing that or doing that is entirely superfluous. This is a cute get right here. I don't really think that this helps him any, but I get what he wants to do, because these hedgehogs, this is like bonus value, essentially. The hedgehogs just want to poke and prod here, and the thing is when you have the harassment unit, we see this in Square Root of -1, who's in the chat right now. We see this when he's playing with Raiders. We see a lot of strong players in LittleWarGame when they're using Raiders, which, if you don't know, a Raider is like if you took a Dark Templar, made it visible, and then made it come out of a barracks. That's just, listen, it's not that strong. If a Dark Templar were visible and came out of the barracks but had half the damage, that's a Raider. And we would see a lot of people, Dark Templars aren't good in a straight up fight, right? Unless your opponent doesn't have vision, they're just not good in a straight up fight. In Little Wargame, we saw much the same thing. You would harass and harass and harass and harass, but eventually there's a point at which the harassment has to end because the player just isn't taking enough damage. They don't care anymore. We see this a lot in Little Wargame. I keep mentioning Little Wargame, one, it's what I come from, and two, this hit point damage relationship that we're seeing here, especially also the catapult. We'll get to that, Square Root. If you're in chat, you're gonna love seeing the catapult. It's great. But eventually, you just have enough units that you're like, I don't care about your little tickle attacks, right? Um, like these 5 hedgehogs, when there were just these 5 hedgehogs are just not doing anything, man. So I mean, there's going to be a dance back and forth. This should be the time, I think, that TLO uses to go ahead and grab his. This should be the time that TLO uses to go grab his 4th base. But he's trying so hard to make sure he gets some damage or some value over here. Also, remember how I said this area is very, very good to defend? Yeah, Meat Farm and Shroudstone is going to defend this. And the hedgehogs could go in, but it's a one-way trip, right? And while that is happening, we're going to see the attack come through over here, and this is a big, good play by Mana. And the thing to note is not just that Mana is getting this huge attack off, it's that Mana is also grabbing the center of the map, which a long time ago at the beginning of this, we talked about how the center of the map, just the map being what it is, favors, just the map being what it is going to favor your boy Mana because his units are slower and he seems like he gets more value out of Shroudstone than TLO does out of this Buzzsaw Cannon. Also, making Bob super strong was great for the early game, but as the army comes in, it becomes more and more of a problem. Now, normally, again, this would be pretty bad from the slower army to be attacking in like this, but as long as this base gets up and a couple Shroudstones go up, or God forbid, a couple meat farms with those Shroudstones, this will just be held off quite nicely. Yep. And they made a point here that we might as well get the vision. This is, I can't take credit for this. This is what the cast was saying. Might as well take the vision while you can. I actually think, yeah, forcing a single point here is very, very good. Yep. There's just not enough. What's interesting here is that I don't know, actually. I think it's better to attack here where Mana is than to attack up here, because if Mana is attacking over here on the side and things go badly, I believe the area that Mana breaks into the brush is from the bottom right-hand side, right? From the 4:30 p.m. side. So it's much better over here for Mana to attack here and then retreat back to this location if need be. Whereas if you attack here, you come back out of the choke and you're you're just on the flat other side, right? You're at the apogee. Now here's the thing: this looks bad, except it's not. And the reason I say it's not is we can't see the supply, but we can see what the relative position is, right? And so now there is actually the Vulcan, kind of a unit that everyone knows and loves to know. And it looks like this is going really badly for Mana, but again, we have to recognize there is a stash of forces over here to help defend, even though this is a bit of a poor engagement. Some defenses got wrecked out, and the most important thing is that Mana was not in it to win. This is not a swing to try and win the game. This is Mana just taking control of the center of the map. As soon as there are some static defenses in the center of the map, the rest of this neatly doesn't matter. And the problem is now that TLO just doesn't have, I mean, this was mentioned also by the cast, but TLO doesn't have the opportunity now to go grab a 4th base. You see this sometimes in Little Wargame, where especially mech players run into this problem a lot, where a mech player really in Little Wargame wants to get their 4th base. That's when they feel online and like they can make the game go long. 3 bases is saturation, all of my buildings, all of my production, but 4 bases is I have time. There's gameplay. We have resources to go, like to spare. And this is a double mine and double Ethereum. Like this is double Ethereum and double it's not linoleum, that's a sinking exercise. Luminite. And the problem is that the same trees that have made this very difficult to attack now mean that TLO actually just has to win the straight up fucking fight against the army and kick it back hard enough to go in here. But this defensive point right here is helpful. It's also worth remembering that the way that Infernals make their units is that when they make their Their iron, it's not Legion. What the hell? Okay, so when they make their conclaves and their iron, right? The iron, I can't remember what it's called. It's not called Iron Valiant. That's a Pokemon. They get to instantly make their units. So what's weird is the closer the shroud gets, the more the instant units become I ignore your defender's advantage, which is a big part of the reason that poor TLO over here needed that fourth base earlier. But now there's just no opportunity. The only way, yeah, and we even see the move out here from Mana because he's kind of saying the thing that I mentioned previously, which is like, oh, you should have a four. Wait, where's your fourth base? What's going on here? So Mana, I mean, I actually want to back out so you can see that. If we go over here, so Mana even thinks that TLO is in a better spot than he is, right? He's just checking the fourth base. And he's like, wait a second, you don't have a fourth base? What the hell is going on here? And that's how he knows that he's just going to win by running in units over and over. You see this a lot in Rax versus Mech and Little Wargame, is that if you have the player contained on a certain number of bases, you're going to be extremely cost inefficient, right? You're going to be like 6,000 gold down, but it doesn't matter if you just run them into the ground over and over. And that's what's happening here, actually, is that this attack looks like it's a big problem and a big deal, but I want to stress that actually, no matter how well this fight seems to be going, I actually disagree from where he attacked. I think he could have attacked from here, unless he broke down. Oh, okay, he did. He broke down the trees right here, right? Which is, I don't know about that. That's kind of telling you. That's kind of saying that you're gonna win the game guaranteed right now, right? But whatever, it's fine. Again, I don't think he should have gotten the southern one. I think if he had gotten the one over here to the side, or especially the one up here to the vision camp, it would have been better. But whatever, he's now getting the veil. He's now getting the shroud. He's in the shroud stone. He's getting veil, and these things die very quickly. Actually, if you can get on top of them, this is another thing that we see in Little Wargame a lot, which is, and I'm skipping over the fight because this is just a six base player against a three base player, when I think the six base player actually has the stronger units that are stronger in a straight up fight but slower, right? So there's no way that this is ending nicely. This is almost a formality before GG at this point. So the reason I keep mentioning the Little Wargame aspect is of starving out your opponent is that, yeah, you just want to keep slamming units into the person, and it doesn't actually matter that you go 6,000 gold, that you're 6,000 gold inefficient, because RTSs are a money game. If you are 6,000 gold inefficient on your trades, but you've mined 10,000 more gold, then that's just it. Yeah, this is also a kind of, I almost think it's BM. Like, he's doing a good move to end the game here, but it's kind of crazy that Mana does that over there with the Fiends, because that's just him saying you can't defend both points at once, again, when I think he has the stronger faction. And we see that the Vulcan with the Bobs does manage to clean up the fight over here, but it's so much economic damage, it doesn't really matter. I want to stress the real economic damage is that poor TLO didn't either have the chance or get the ability to go grab the fourth base earlier, and I think the map was more favorable to Mana. Like, I actually think if you just hear that it's Infernals, good win Mana. I think if you just hear that it's Infernals against Vanguard, that's kind of something we could expect. So we're just on to the next one, yeah? Nice. Thank you so much for joining, by the way. All right, come on. Come on, Internet. Come on, Toaster. All right. Again, this is analysis, not a cast, so you already know. Now, I want to talk about this map because people have said, oh, it looks like Scrap Station. I'm going to shout out my man, Dragon Archer Z from Little Wargame. This map looks like Stronghold Fabius. Like, okay, so here's the thing that had me really confused about game plans for this map. So, again, Infernals, slower, but they have Veil. So they have the white armor plus 50% of their health in white mana, like in white health. I'm calling it Veil. You can call it Shroud if you want. I don't, because Shroud Stone exists. I don't want to call it Mist because, that means you could miss an attack or something like that. So I just call it Veil. So I think Infernals are just they're stronger in a straight up fight, and they seem pretty slow. The fastest units that we see them have are Fiends, and those come at the opportunity cost of the straight up bullying that Brutes can do. And this is interesting. Okay, first off, I love that we're going to talk about catapults. I love that we're going to talk about catapults. So the game plan here on Stronghold Fabius and on Scrapyard Station is, again, I think TLO with scouts and with uh, hedgehogs, right? I think he's just actually the faster faction overall. It's not that everything he makes is faster. He feels a lot more like Little Wargame Beast. You have these fast units that don't necessarily win in a straight up fight, except they have numbers. Because they're faster, you can always choose to disengage, right? Look at the scout right here. Look at the we're going to see the hedgehogs, a couple of them again. But you have a couple of strong units that are a bit sturdier, right? You have the Vulcan, who is AoE. You have the you also have, I'm pretty sure that they can just make the turrets. They can make their own equivalent of catapults. I think they're called an Atlas. Could be mistaken. So on maps like Fabius, Fabius Stronghold, and Scrapyard Station, the more mobile faction, you would expect some kind of airplay or drops, right? So look at this. Like this scout, not as fast. This poor SCUOOUT, what would he be like?